5 centuries before Columbus, a Viking called Lindisfarne walked on North American soil with tools made only from wood, iron and wool sails. The Norse crossed the dangerous North Atlantic without maps or compasses, a task seen as nearly impossible today. This story follows Viking culture from its early beginnings to its mark on our modern world. You will learn these sailors did more than raid. They built lasting kingdoms, detailed laws, and great stories that still touch our lives now. Their true tale is richer and more surprising than the simple raider image. Shaped by Scandinavia's cold northern lands, the Norse came from a place that required toughness. Norway's steep fjords, Sweden's thick forests, and Denmark's windy plains created a culture built to survive Europe's hardest settings. Farmland was scarce here, but long coastlines offered chances for the brave or those in need to sail beyond the horizon. Their society was spread out in local, not one united nation with a single ruler. Early groups were based around family ties. Clans called TT formed the core of Norse life, giving both identity and safety. These family bonds were crucial where living often meant working together. Each group usually followed a local chief or jarl who held power through wealth, fighting skill, and a link to the gods. Early Norse towns lived on a mix of food sources. They grew barley, rye and oats where possible. Many also fished, hunted, and kept animals. Cows, sheep, goats, and pigs gave not just meat, but also milk, wool and hides, key resources in the cold north. This varied way of getting food helped them survive through harvests that would ruin farming-only societies. The hard land created a practical, clever spirit. Finds show skilled ironwork that made everything from farm tools to scary weapons. The Norse made special tools for woodworking, shipbuilding, and making cloth. Women ran complex home economies, saving food for winter and making textiles, essential for harsh living. Their craft showed not just skill, but a view that valued smart answers to nature's tests. Trade routes existed long before the Viking Age began. Finds show wide exchange networks across northern Europe. Baltic amber, walrus ivory, and furs were prized trade items linking Norse towns to wider European markets. These early trade ties gave many Norse experience with fore on lands and ways. Knowledge useful in later expansion. Norse politics kept changing. By the 502nd CE, small kingdoms began forming across Scandinavia, each fighting for control of nearby areas. This rivalry built social pressure, especially for younger sons with no one to inherit. Good farmland grew scarce as populations rose, creating a group of eager men with few local chances. For these men, trips abroad offered wealth, status, and land they could not find at home. Their beliefs deeply shaped Norse views and actions. They saw a world filled with many beings, gods, giants, elves, and dwarves in constant struggle. In this world, humans had an important but shaky place. Warriors who died bravely in battle might be picked by Odin for Valhalla, while those dying of age or sickness faced a dim afterlife in hell. This belief encouraged bold risks and action, especially for men seeking glory and fight. Long before writing was common, Norse people kept their history and wisdom through spoken stories. Professional poets called skalds remembered and recited complex verses recording royal lines and farming tips alike. These traditions have many uses. Fun on long winter nights, keeping cultural identity, and passing practical knowledge between generations. The strong memory methods of skalds later helped to Iceland's famous sagas. The skalds' spoken stories give us glimpses of Viking history. But centuries before these tales were told, Scandinavia faced a disaster so severe it may have changed northern Europe's path. In 536 CE, the sun vanished for over a year, plunging the region into dark, hunger, and a desperate fight to live that would forge the Viking mind. This terrible event left signs in tree rings and ice cores, showing temperatures fell several degrees across the north. Finds suggest some Norse settlements lost half their people as crops failed season after season. The survivors with shrinking resources had to adapt, making new social structures and more aggressive ways to get supplies that later defined Viking society. But this crisis was just one turn in a longer story. The Nordic Bronze Age from about 1700 to 500 BC, he left amazing pictures carved on coastal rocks. These carvings found across Scandinavia, especially in Sweden's Bohuslän area, show detailed scenes of ships, armed fighters, ritual marches, and hunting groups. One stunning example at an shows a ship with 13 armed figures, very like the longships that would scare Europe 2,000 years later. As bronze shifted to iron around 500 CE, Scandinavian society changed deeply. Hill forts began appearing, showing more competition and land fights. Digs reveal special weapons becoming more common engraved, marking the rise of a warrior elite. At a yacht spring Mose in Denmark, diggers found a war canoe from 350 BCE, holding gear for 80 warriors, proof of organized war centuries before the Viking Age. Roman goods reaching Scandinavia show trade networks were active long before the first Viking raid. Roman coins, glass beads, and bronze pots have been found across Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, sometimes far from Roman borders. At Dreamy on Denmark's Disappearance in Ireland, digs uncovered a huge chief's hall with workshops making jewel remixing Roman designs with Norse styles, showing cultural exchange as early as the 202nd CE. The spiritual world of pre-Viking Scandinavia was just as complex. The 4th century gay late US gold horns, masterpieces of gold work, later stolen and melted in 1802, show figures scholars see as early Norse gods. These fancy ritual objects suggest myths later, written in Viking times, had developed for centuries. Finds show sacred groves and bogs were ritual sites where offerings like weapons, jewelry, and sometimes people were placed to speak with supernatural powers. Among the best windows into pre-Viking life are the bog bodies, people preserved in amazing detail in the airless acidic peat bogs. The tall man found in Denmark in 1950 dates to about 400 BCE. His face is so well kept that his brown calm look are clear after 2,400 years. The rope still on his neck tells us he died by hanging, likely as a ritual sacrifice. Checking his stomach showed his last meal, a porridge of barley, flax and wild plants, direct proof of pre-Viking diet. These separate settlements, trade nets, and spiritual act slowly joined into more complex societies during the migration period from 400 to 550 CE. More boat burials, where important people were laid in ships with rich grave goods, came before the famous Viking ship burials. At Vendel in Sweden, several grand boat graves from the 6th and 7th centuries hold fine helmets, weapons, and imported luxuries, showing the growing power of warrior elites who would later plan the first Viking trips. From sacred grave items, tools of conquest, boats grew at the heart of Norse culture. Think of this puzzle. The most feared raiders in European history won not with greater numbers or better weapons, but with ships so flexible they made old defenses pointless. How could a simple wooden ship bring Europe's strongest kingdoms to their knees? The answer is in the revolutionary design of the Viking longship. Unlike the heavy trade ships of their time, Norse shipwrights made a craft mixing opposite traits: stability for oceans with great handling in shallow water. This double ability turned Europe's river systems from barriers into Viking roads, letting raiders strike far inland, where sea attacks were impossible before. The brilliance of longship building began with the hull. Using the clinker method, shipwrights overlapped oak planks and fixed them with iron rivets, making a flexible shell that could take rough seas without breaking. This shell-first way differed from Mediterranean shipbuilding, which built the frame first. The result was a ship light enough for 30 men to carry on land, yet strong enough to cross the open Atlantic. The keel, a huge oak piece forming the ship's spine, gave key stability without losing speed. Master makers shaped each keel from one oak trunk, picking trees with a natural curve for the ship's shape. Around this center, they built a vessel that could switch between power methods as needed. When winds were good, the rectangular wool sail, often over 120 square feet, gave great driving force in calm seas or tricky waters. Up to 50 oarsmen could keep good speed. This mix gave longships unmatched range and tactical choice. The usual warship was between 55 and 90 feet long, but just 8 feet wide. These slim lines helped their famous speed. Finds confirm the best ships could reach 15 knots in good conditions, faster than almost any chaser. The longship was more than a tech success. It was a cultural foundation. Building needed special knowledge passed down through shipwright generations. Tree ring study of saved ships shows careful with choice. Oak for structure and pine for planks got in the best season for lasting strength. Norse Sea innovation went beyond the basic longship to include special ships for different needs. The sleek Drek or dragon ship with its scary carved front served mainly for war, while the wider deeper neck carried goods and animals on long trade trips. The smaller curve allowed flexible travel for local voyages and fishing. The geocasted ship found in a burial mound in 1880 shows Viking shipbuilding skill well. From about 890 C, this well-kept ship has 16 oar pairs, a steering oar on the right side, and a smart system of removable pine planks making a temporary deck for the crew. Even better was the Osberger ship built in 820 C and found in 1904, though not made for ocean trips. This richly decorated ship shows the artistic skill that matched technical talent in Norse shipbuilding. The detailed animal head posts and fine wood carvings turned a working craft into a show of power and cultural pride. The mental effect of these ships was huge. The sudden sight of dragon-headed longships attacking from the sea meant terror across Europe. Writers then described the unique shapes of coming Norse fleets as signs of shore destruction, a fame that gave Vikings an edge before fighting started. These ships of ruin also became humanity's top tools of finding, with only the stars, bird actions, and strange crystals that could find the sun on cloudy days. Viking sailors did what should have been impossible, reaching North America 500 years before Columbus sailed, when most European sailors feared losing sight of land. Norse seafarers took to the open ocean with stunning confidence. This sea skill came not from tech advantage, but from deep reading of nature's navigation signs. Viking sailors remembered wayland seabird migration paths, knowing certain species stayed within set distances from shore. They saw small changes in ocean swells that hinted at nearby islands before they wove visible and tracked floating seaweed and driftwood suggesting land was near. Maybe most impressive was the use of star navigation. Without tools, Viking steersmen followed the North Star or Polaris and gained a basic sense of latitude. They knew Polaris set lower in the sky as they sailed south and higher as they went north. This let them keep steady east-west courses across empty seas by holding the star at the same height. Finds hint they may have used simple bearing dials, wooden discs marked with directions to track their place relative to these star guides. The mysterious sunstone or solar stein end from Norse tales may have been Iceland's bar, a clear calcite crystal that polarizes light. Recent tests show such crystals can indeed find the sun's spot, even under thick clouds or in twilight, by turning the crystal and seeing where its double image glows equally bright. Navigators could find the sun's place with good accuracy. They keep thus in northern lands where cloudy skies often lasted weeks. Vikings had special words for the ocean's many faces. They knew 9 distinct sea states from the gentle K an air slightly rippled to the terrifying B or a raw storm wave. This fine sense of water conditions helped them guess whether changes hours before they came and change course as needed. They also held a complex mental log of ocean currents across the North Atlantic, knowledge passed by mail from generation to generation. The Norse idea of ley or sea route was one of history's most advanced pre-modern navigation systems. These were not just directions, but full mental maps including seasonal shifts, ocean currents, common winds, bird migrations, and clear landmarks. Each route held deep knowledge about when paths were safe and when to avoid them. Much like modern GPS handles many factors at once, Viking helmsmen processed lots of environmental details to keep their course. This navigation skill pushed Vikings amazing distances. They settled Iceland by 874 CE, colonized Greenland by 985 CE, and reached North America around 1000 CE, the Norse finding of Finland, likely Newfoundland and maybe areas further south, beat Columbus by nearly 5 centuries, a feat modern experts more and more see as one of history's most overlooked navigation achievements. One of their smartest navigation tricks involved taking ravens on ships when unsure where land lay. Vikings would free these birds whose instinct is to fly towards solid ground if it is near. If the raven circled and came back to the ship, sailors knew no land was close. If it flew straight in one direction and did not return, the ship would follow its path. This method, told in Norse sagas, shows a practical use of animal behavior in navigation choices. The same ravens that led Vikings to new lands would soon see the darker use of their ship. On June 8, 793 CE, dawn rose over the holy island of Lindisfarne off England's Northern coast. Monks did their morning prayers, not knowing that, on the horizon, dragon-headed ships came with terrifying purpose. What followed would shock Christian Europe deeply and forever change how the continent saw its northern neighbors. Lindisfarne held all the Norse raiders wanted. Its monastery, started by Irish monks Saint Aidan in 635 CE, had grown rich over years. Illuminated books, fancy relic holders, and silver cups filled its treasury. Portable wealth made weak by its isolation and the monks' vow of peace. The holy men who had given their lives to God met warriors who worshipped very different gods. The attack was quick and harsh. According to records then, the raiders spilled saintly blood by the altar and stepped on saintly bodies in God's house like street dirt. The monastery's precious holy items, some showing generations of craft, were taken as loot. Monks not killed faced slavery in distant lands, while sacred texts were wrecked or thrown to the winds. What made Lindisfarne matter was not just its violence, but its meaning. This was not just a raid on a rich target. It was a strike on one of early Christian Europe's most sacred spots. The monastery had made the great Lindisfarne Gospels and was linked to St. Cuthbert, one of England's most respected holy men. The mental shock spread through Europe because it shook the common world view. How could God let his most devoted followers suffer such cruelty? Alcuin of York, a leading scholar at Charlemagne's court, captured this crisis in a letter to the Bishop of Lindisfarne. He wrote, "Never before has such fear struck Britain as we now suffer from a pagan race. St. Cuthbert's church is stained with priestly blood, robbed of all its treasures." For Alcuin and others, this attack was not just political, it was apocalyptic. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle notes strange signs before the attack. It says that year off omens appeared over northern Bream, frightening the people greatly. They were huge whirlwinds, lightning flashes, and fiery dragons seen flying in the air. These were not just pretty words, but showed how fully the raid broke the Christian sense of divine safety. What made Lindisfarne so crushing was its timing. England in the late 700s was politically split. The Northern Kingdom, once strong, had faded through internal fights and dynasty struggles. Further south, Mercia and Wessex fought for power, leaving coastal monasteries open. The Vikings had sensed these weaknesses, striking just when England lacked united leadership for a good response. The raid was only the start. Within decades, Viking raids turned into planned campaigns targeting religious centers across Britain, Ireland, and France. Monasteries like Iona in Scotland would be raided many times. Wales Jaru, Monk Wirmet, and other learning centers faced similar fate. The raid's success taught the Norse a key lesson. Christian sites were not only rich but often set in lonely places for thought, making them perfect targets. Digs complicate the story of pure religious fight. Finds near Lindisfarne show remains of what seems raided buried with both weapons and a Christian cross. This hints that even early on, cultural and religious lines were blurrier than records say. Some Vikings may have known Christianity through trade, while others took symbols from victims without taking their faith. What made monasteries such tempting targets was not just their isolation, but their concentrated wealth. Unlike regular towns where valuables were spread among many homes, monasteries kept treasures in one place, holding precious metalwork, lit books in jeweled covers, and stores of grain and supplies meant to keep religious groups through lean times. For raiders seeking most reward with least risk, these holy places were perfect chances. Viking raid timing showed clever planning. Many raids matched big Christian feasts, like Easter or Christmas, when monastery treasures grew with ritual items and visiting pilgrims brought more wealth. Attacking at dawn gave surprise, while hitting during Sunday Mass meant the whole religious community was gathered in one weak spot. This tactical sense fights the idea Vikings were just random pirates. Their approach showed planned strategy. These early raids usually had small fleets of 2 to 6 ships, each holding 30 to 60 fighters. The small size allowed speed and stealth, letting raiders disappear before local forces could form. In one well-known case, Vikings hit the monastery at Noiremont off the French coast, fully looted it, and vanished before mainland defenders could even launch boat. This hit-and-run way made a mood of helplessness. Coastal towns never knew when or where the next strike would come. As word of Viking raids spread, a mental terror gripped coastal areas. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle wrote that heathen men miserably ruined God's church on Lindisfarne with robbery and killing. Similar reports echoed across Europe, making a climate of fear that magnified the real damage done. By the early 800s, some coastal monasteries were left before raiders even arrived, monks fleeing inland with whatever treasures they could carry. This flight had a surprise result. As religious groups moved to inner regions, they brought with them the books, relics, and learning that might have stayed in weak coastal centers. Ironically, Viking fear sped the spread of Christian knowledge and texts across Europe, helping save works that might have been lost in their original spots. By the mid-800s, Viking ways changed from simple raids to smart extortion. Some Norse leaders saw they could gain more by threatening harm than doing it. This protection racket, made formal as Danegeld, began when Vikings besieged Paris in 845. Frankish King Charles the Bold paid £7,000 of silver to make them leave, setting a pattern repeated many times across Europe. This shift from raiders to blackmailers showed the practical business mind behind Norse aggression. The huge amounts of holy treasures flowing back to Scandinavia went through odd changes. Digs in Dane, Mark and Norway have found pieces of gilded church, items reused as personal decoration. A piece of a bishop's staff became a brooch. Parts of cups were melted and remade as a ring. Some items kept their original form, but served new uses. Silver communion cups became drinking mugs at Norse feasts, making sharp contrasts of sacred and everyday. The melting of Christian treasures hinted at something deeper. The change of Anglo-Saxon England itself. In 865 CE, the great heathen army landed on English shores, bringing not just raids, but conquest. This was not a usual raiding group, but a huge military force led by sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, who by Norse tradition came to avenge their father's death by King Lla of northern Brema. This army was something new, a coordinated invasion force with strategic goals beyond simple loot. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle noted their coming with dread, saying the Vikings took winter quarters in East Anglia, something raiders had never done before. This staying meant they planned to remain. The great heathen army moved with surprising order. They got horses from locals, making a mobile strike force that could push deep inland. By 866, they took Kołobrzeg, one of England's main cities. The timing was perfect. Northern Brema was in civil war between rival kings Lla and Osbrht, who briefly put aside their fight to face the Viking threat. Their united stand came too late. Both kings died trying to retake York. As the army moved south, they used smart war tactics. They set up fortified bases called winter camps where they could launch campaigns across seasons. These were not temporary shelters but defensive spots with earth walls and wooden fences. Finds at Torquay in Lincolnshire show one such camp covering over 135 acres, large enough for thousands of warriors, camp followers and traders. The invaders systematically hit each Anglo-Saxon kingdom. Mercia fell next, with King Burgred fleeing to Rome by 874. East Anglia's King Edmund refused to reject Christianity or accept Viking rule and suffered a brutal martyrdom, tied to a tree, shot with arrows and beheaded. Only Wessex under Alfred the Great fought back well. Alfred's early losses taught him to adapt. He reorganized his army, made a system of fortified towns called burhs, and built his standing fort. His win at Edington in 878 forced Viking leader Guthrum to accept baptism and pull his forces to the northeast. The Treaty of Wedmore that followed set a formal border between Alfred's land and what would be the Danelaw. The Danelaw covered about the northeast half of England from London to northern Brema. In this area, Norse custom, language, and laws took root. The term Danelaw means where Danish law, not Anglo-Saxon law, ruled. Viking rulers split big estates into small lots called car. UK's not Anglo-Saxon hides, showing different ways to manage land and tax. This was not just military occupation. The archaeological record shows wide Norse settlement. At sites like Coppergate in York, digs found proof of craft workshops, houses, and trade. The Vikings set up 5 fortified towns known as the Five Boroughs: Lincoln, Nottingham, Derby, Leicester, and Stamford, which became government and market hubs. Viking influence touched daily life in deep ways. Old Norse gave over 2,000 words to English. Common terms like sky, egg, knife, and husband. More than 1,400 place names in England have Norse parts. Thwaite means cleared land, often a homestead, Thorpe a small settlement, and by a farm or village. The spread of these names forms a language map of the Danelaw's borders. The Norse settlers slowly blended into English society. Many took Christianity within a generation, though often keeping special burial ways mixing both traditions. Marriage with Anglo-Saxon women created a mixed people. In some regions, unique Anglo-Scandinavian art styles appeared, mixing Norse animal designs with Christian symbols. The Danelaw was not one solid thing, but varied by region in its cultural fit. In Yorkshire, Norwegian effect from Dublin mixed with Danish parts, making different cultural patterns than East Anglia. This local variety shows how the Viking presence was not just forced, but talked over and adapted to local conditions. The complex cultural mix of the Danelaw did not appear overnight. It began with one terrifying invasion force that changed European history forever. The Great Heathen Army of 865 was something historians still try to explain. How did a scattered society of farmers and part-time raiders suddenly produce a smart war machine able to conquer kingdoms? This was not just a bigger version of earlier raid. Find show a force with strategic vision and operational discipline far beyond typical raid groups. The army traveled with blacksmiths, leatherworkers, and other craftspeople key for keeping war gear on long campaigns. Their moves followed a set pattern, building defensive winter camps, launching coordinated spring attacks, then securing gains before the next push. Recent digs at Thetford in East Anglia found proof of metal workshops making arrowheads and fixing mail armor, suggesting the army moved with full logistic support. Even more telling are remains of big food processing areas, showing they solved feeding thousands of warriors far from home. A mark of professional armies through history. The army scheme and structure showed smart control, while we imagined wild berserkers. The truth involved careful teamwork between several chiefs with clear roles. Finds for Rapton show the winter camp of 873 to 870. For C added D-shaped for using an existing church, showing practical use of structures for war needs. Maybe most interesting is the mass grave at Rapton where over 250 individuals, mostly strong males, were buried together. Chemical study of teeth from these remains shows people from different Scandinavian areas, confirming the army was a team of fighters from across the Norse world, not one kingdom's force. Unlike usual Viking war bands, the Great Army included pros who had fought together in Ireland, Scotland, and mainland Europe before reaching England. The army edge went beyond weapons. They used smart siege tactics new to England, building siege engines and digging under defence walls. Written proof from Frankish sources describes similar Viking armies using catapults against Paris in 885, suggesting these methods were shared war knowledge among Norse elite fighters. Coin evidence shows another side of their strategy. Within 2 years of controlling York, the Vikings began making their own coins, showing quick interest in economic rule. These coins, bearing both Christian crosses and Norse signs, were not just propaganda, but practical tools for tax and trade, showing impressive administrative vision. The most fascinating part of the Great Army's campaign was its adaptability. First focused on loot and revenge, its leaders soon saw chances for permanent settlement. By 876, part of the army under Halfdan began splitting Yorkshire among its followers, giving land grants called so clans that became the base of Norse English society. This sharing system made a net of loyal fighters with a stake in keeping Norse rule, turning raiders in troll and owning elite. What started as an invasion force slowly became a colonization effort. Bones from settlements set up after the army shown Norsemen buried with Anglo-Saxon women, revealing marriage patterns that sped cultural mixing. Within 2 generations, these communities had unique mixed identities, keeping some Scandinavian ways while taking local customs and Christian practice. The pattern of raid, conquer, and settle worked differently in Francia than in England. Imagine sailing 120 longships up the Seine River during Christianity's holiest week, then asking for equal to £7,000 of silver from Western Europe's strongest ruler. When the Vikings looked at Paris, they were not just seeking loot, they were testing the base of Carolingian power. The Seine River became a road for Norse ambition, letting raiders push deep into the Frankish heartland. Paris, on an island in the river, was both a strategic choke point and a symbol of Frankish wealth. In 845 during Easter week, a big fleet under a chief named Ragnar reached the city gates. Frankish writers then described the terror as Vikings loot churches and monasteries before King Charles the Bold, Charlemagne's grandson, paid a huge ransom to make them leave. This first strike set a pattern repeated across Francia. Attack, destroy, and take payment. But the biggest fight came 40 years later. In December 885, a Viking force gassed at 10,000 to 30,000 fighters and hundreds of ships neared Paris. This time, the city was ready. The stone bridges crossed the Seine, blocking Viking passage a river, while Count Odo and Bishop Goselin had strengthened Paris defences. What followed was one of the medieval period's most notable sieges. The Vikings built smart siege engines, including catapults and battering rams. They tried filling the river with junk and trees to pass the bridges. When direct attacks failed, they dug under the towers. The Franks fought back with boiling oil, stones, and makeshift weapons. One Frankish writer tells how defenders dropped wax-covered barrels filled with stones onto Viking siege towers, crushing them. The siege dragged through winter into spring. Sickness spread in both the Viking camp and the city. When Bishop Gozlin died in April 800 Itexus, Llewellyn Paris fell hard. Yet Count Odo made a daring trip through enemy lines to get help, coming back with a small relief force that lifted defender spirits. Though hugely outnumbered, the Parisians held on. By autumn 800 Itexus, Emperor Charles the Fat finally arrived with the main Frankish army, but instead of driving the Vikings off, he made a deal, paying them £700 of silver and letting them raid Burgundy instead. This betrayal of Paris shocked people, then unfurther hurt Carolingian authority. The emperor was removed the next year and Count Odo, the Paris hero, was made king of West Francia. The siege's aftermath sped political splitting across Francia. Local nobles who had defended their lands well gained power and legitimacy as the Carolingian dynasty weakened. Instead of keeping a united answer to Viking attacks, regional powers began making separate deals with Norse war leaders. Some Frankish rulers took the rare step of giving land to Viking chiefs for protection against other raiders. The most important of these deals came in 911, when Charles the Simple gave territory around the Lower Seine to a Viking leader named Rollo. This area would become Normandy, named for the Northmen who settled there. Rollo agreed to guard the Seine Valley against future raiders and became Christian, setting a pattern that turned Vikings from foes into neighbors. The Paris sieges showed not just Viking war skill, but their political smarts. They knew the symbolic weight of attacking the former Carolingian capital during religious feasts. They saw when to push military gain and when to talk payment. Their flexibility, shifting between raiding, siege work, and settlement, made them impossible to counter with normal strategies. This political skill would grow into something far beyond mere raid tactics. What happens when the very people who terrified a civilization become its rulers in just 5 generations? Viking raider descendants changed from outsiders demanding silver at spear point to nobles, leading one of Europe's most advanced feudal states. The story starts with Rollo, a strong Norse fighter whose origins are debated. Some sources say he came from Norway, others Denmark. What is sure is that by 911 CE, he was strong enough that Charles the Simple, king of the Franks, saw more chance in alliance than fight. The Treaty of St. Clair, Surrey-PT, he made an unheard-of deal. Rollo got large lands around the Seine River mouth in exchange for protecting Francia from future Viking raids and swearing loyalty to the crown. This moment marked a radical shift. Vikings were no longer temporary raiders, but permanent players in Western European politics. Rollo's baptism, as Robert showed this change. Though his turn to Christianity was likely practical, not spiritual, the former sea wolf now had the job of ruling the very lands his people had scared for decades. What followed was one of history's most remarkable cultural shifts. Within one generation, Rollo's followers left their Norse tongue for French, their pagan ways for Christianity, and their equal warrior groups for a complex feudal order. By 927 CE, Rollo's son, William Longsworth, did court business all in French, though he kept ties with Scandinavian allies. The new Norman identity was neither purely Frankish nor Norse, but a special mix. They kept their ancestors' war skill while taking continental government systems. This cultural blend made a uniquely lively society that valued both new ideas and tradition. Norman nobles built stone castles using advanced defense design while decorating them with art showing Norse-influenced motif. The religious change was especially striking. The grandsons of men who had looted monasteries became eager church supporters. Duke Richard I from 940 to 996 founded Fakeham Abbey, while his son Richard II set up many religious houses across Normandy. The former raiders used their organizing talent to make one of medieval Europe's most efficient governments, with careful records and a central system quite advanced for its time. Normandy's military power kept growing through the 900 seconds and 1000 seconds. Norman knights made a special fighting style, mixing Viking aggression with Frankish horse tactics. Their fame spread across Europe, drawing eager fighters from Scandinavia, Brittany, and Flanders seeking fortune under Norman lead. This war skill soon showed beyond Normandy's borders. By the early 1000 seconds, Norman adventurers had set themselves in southern Italy, slowly taking lands from Byzantine and Muslim rulers. The Norman conquest of Sicily, done by 1091, made a Mediterranean kingdom where Arabs, Greeks, and Normans lived under rule by Viking warrior descendants. Yet the most famous Norman conquest was surely England's. In 1066, William the Conqueror, Rollo's great-great-great-grandson, gathered a huge invasion force to press his claim to the English throne. His win at Hastings deeply changed English society, replacing the Anglo-Saxon elite with Norman nobles and bringing continental feudalism to the island. The Norman achievement was unmatched. They made a network of kingdoms from the North Sea to the Mediterranean, all ruled by Viking secular descendants. Their government innovations, especially in England, set the base for modern state systems still here today. The Irish Sea became a blue highway for Viking raiders as early as 795 CE, when Norse ships first reached Ireland's east coast. Monastery islands like Lamb Bay and Iona were perfect targets, rich, lonely, and lacking defenses against sea attackers. These early raids were quick and harsh, with monks and their precious holy items disappearing north along with local treasures. But Ireland was not just another stop on the Viking raid circuit. It offered something far more valuable than quick loot. What began as seasonal raids became permanent by the 842nd. In 841 CE, a group of Norse fighters set up a fortified spot they called Dublin at the river Liffey's mouth. This was not a temporary camp, but a long piho, a safe port where ships could dock and warriors could live. Digs have shown these early settlers built solid, wooden buildings along what is now Wood Quay, making a base that would grow into one of medieval Europe's most lively ports. The strategic genius of Dublin's spot cannot be overstated. At the meeting of the Liffey and Pod, the early rivers, it offered sheltered ports with inland water access while keeping fast escape paths to the open sea. The Vikings soon saw its potential as more than a raid base. It could be the center of a vast trade net from the Arctic Circle to North Africa. By the mid-800s, Dublin had become a busy trade center. Finds show its markets traded Baltic amber, Greenland walrus ivory, Middle East silver, and Frankish wine. But perhaps the best earning item through Dublin was human lives. The slave trade formed the dark core of Dublin's economy, with Irish captives shipped to markets as far as Constantinople and Baghdad. Digs have found slave chains and holding pens near the water, grim reminders of this brutal business. The Norse were not content just to trade in Ireland. They wanted to rule it. By the late 800s, Viking leaders had made themselves kings of Dublin, with influence reaching far beyond the settlement's wooden walls. The most famous of these rulers, Olaf Guthfrithson, controlled lands on both sides of the Irish Sea in the 932nd, making a Norse sea kingdom that challenged existing power structures. These Viking kings did not rule alone, though. They married Irish nobility, making complex family alliances that blurred lines between local and newcomer. Dublin's growth under Norse rule was striking. By 900 CE, It had grown from its first walls to cover several acres with special areas for craftsmen, traders, and shipwrights. Archaeologists have found proof of advanced town planning unusual for early medieval Europe. Streets set in grid patterns, stone-lined drains, and set workshop zones for metalwork and leather tanning. The city's population grew with a mix of Norse settlers, Irish locals, and traders from across Europe and beyond. This Norse power would not last forever, as Irish kingdoms reorganized and strengthened against the Viking presence. Strong leaders rose to challenge Norse control. Brian Bow, High King of Ireland, led a coalition against Dublin's Norse rulers and their allies at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. Though Brian died there, his side won, marking the start of the end for independent Viking power in Ireland. Yet even in defeat, the Norse legacy stayed woven into Irish society. Even as Vikings lost their hold on Irish shores, the fame of their fighters stayed etched in the nightmares of those they faced. How did men sailing from a thinly peopled northern land become Europe's most feared warriors? The answer lies not in the myths we have, but in battlefield truths that archaeology now brings to light. At the core of Viking combat strength was the shield wall, or SK. Ildeborg. Fighters would lock their shields, usually round, wooden, and iron-rimmed, making a nearly unbreakable barrier. This formation was not still, but could advance steadily or hold ground against charges. The discipline needed to keep these forms under pressure shows a training level rarely noted in popular pictures of Vikings as wild berserkers. The usual Viking fighter carried a spear as his main weapon. Cheap, versatile, and deadly good. Axes were also common with curved edges, able to hook shield rims to tear them down. Unlike what movies suggest, swords were luxury items, often passed through generations and named in stories. These blades meant real wealth, with pattern-welded steel needing special skill to forge. The best examples mixed use with fine decoration on hilts and pommels. Finds have clearly answered the Viking helmet question. No horns. Real Norse helmets were practical war gear, usually cone-shaped with a nose guard to protect the face. The horned helmet myth began with 1800s Romantic painters and was fixed by Wagner's operas. Real war helmets were made to deflect blows, not look scary. Among Norse fighters were the famous berserkers, elite warriors who entered battle in a trance-like rage. Accounts then describe them howling like animals, biting their shields, and showing superhuman strength and fearlessness. Some theories say they used mind-changing substances like fly agaric mushrooms or alcohol, while others suggest mental conditioning methods. Whatever their ways, they served as shock troops to break enemy spirit through fear. Viking combat was not just brute force, but tactical flexibility. In England, they excelled at fast horse moves, dismounting to fight, and remounting to reposition. On rivers, they mastered ambush, using land knowledge to trap bigger forces. At sea, their boarding tactics used special weapons like boarding axes with hooks for grabbing ship rails. This tactical adaptability made Vikings unpredictable foes who could use weak points in normal defenses. The structure of raid groups showed smart military thought. A corps of hardened veterans gave stability and experience, while younger fighters brought energy and aggression. This mix made a balanced forcible to keep campaigns going. Leadership went to proven warriors, not nobles by birth, making a merit system that rewarded new ideas and effectiveness. Test archaeology has shown the crushing power of Viking weapons. Tests with copy axes show a skilled fighter could split a shield or even a helmet in one strike. Training used weighted practice weapons, making real arms feel lighter and faster in actual combat. This approach to weapon handling matches methods still used in special forces training today. Viking weapons often had rune writings thought to give them supernatural power. Most famous are the Ulfbjörn HT swords bearing the maker's name and showing the top weapon tech of the time. Metal study shows these blades had crucible steel with very few impurities. tech not widely available in Europe until centuries later. This suggests Norse traders got advanced materials through eastern trade routes reaching as far as the Islamic world. While their fighters used those legendary Ulfby or HT swords, they returned not to law as chaos, but to a society with set courts, property rights, and complex social ranks. Viking communities worked on a fine balance of honor, law and clan loyalty that would feel oddly familiar today. A world where reputation could be your best asset or your deadliest weakness. The Norse social order was clear, but allowed movement unusual for later medieval system. At the top stood the Jar Elith, chiefs and nobles who owned huge lands and won loyalty through birth, wealth, and war skill. Below them, the carls, free farmers, craftspeople, traders, and sailors made most of Norse society. These were not low peasants, but proud independent landowners who joined in ruling could gather much wealth. At the bottom were the thralls, slaves taken in raids or born into bondage, who did the hardest work, but could sometimes earn or buy freedom. The heart of Viking rule was the thing, a meeting of free men mixing parts of parliament, court, and festival, herald open sky at sacred spots. Communities met to solve disputes, make laws, and even choose kings. Iceland Disappearance, set up in 930 CE, is the oldest working parliamentary system in the world. During these meetings, skilled speakers could change public opinion, while law experts called law speakers recited complex law codes fully from memory, saving them through generations before writing. Justice in Norse society worked without prisons or police. Instead, the community itself enforced rulings through a smart system of payment and social pressure. Murder, for example, needed Virgil D or man payment to the victim's family, with amounts carefully set by the victim's social rank. Those who refused to follow legal judgments faced the scary sentence of outlaw, declared VARG, or a VM or wolf in holy places. They could be killed without penalty, thrown out from law and community protection. Family ties formed the base of Norse society, with households often holding several generations under one roof. The importance of bloodlines showed in detailed telling of family trees, with some Icelanders today still able to trace their roots to first Viking settlers. Blood feuds could last generations, with each killing demanding answer. Yet even these fights had cultural limits, with clear rules on who could be targeted and when revenge was fitting. Against the violent fame abroad, Norse communities kept inner order through complex honor codes. A person's word was their bond, with oaths sworn on iron rings or weapons holding supernatural weight. Reputation set by courage, honesty, generosity, and wisdom was carefully kept through both deeds and smart handling of social hope. Even a spoken insult could harm one's honor so badly that Norse law knew specific fight words that legally justified hitting back. Viking cultural life went far beyond raiding and war. Winter nights in great halls had feasts with scald icy poetry, complex verses praising leader deeds or marking historic events. These poems used tricky metaphorical language called kennings, where simple ideas like ship might become sea steed or wave rider. Strategy games like a chain if at AFL, like chess, showed tactical thought, while physical contests in wrestling, stone lifting, and weapon skills kept warrior readiness in peaceful time. Dig finds keep showing surprises about Norse home life, far from unwashed barbarians. Vikings valued personal cleanliness, with digs finding tweezers, scoops, combs, and other grooming tools as common grave goods. Saturday was washing day, or laugardagier, and public bathing was a regular social activity. Finds have reshaped our view of Viking society, but perhaps no find has been more revolutionary than the famous book A Warrior Grave in Sweden. For over a century, archaeologists surely said this heist, that is burial with weapons, war game pieces, and to sacrificed horses belonged to a male war leader. The 2017 day and a study revealed something that broke common belief. The body was female. This single discovery made historians rethink all they knew about gender roles in Norse society. While their male counterparts raided foreign shores, Norse women held remarkable power at home. The HUS Fraser or House Lady held respect and authority that would have shocked people in other European societies. When men left for months or years on trade trips or raids, these women did not just keep household, they ruled them. They managed farm production, directed servants and slaves, and made key choices affecting family wealth and survival. The symbol of this power was literally on their person. The HUS Fraser wore a fancy key set on her belt or decorative brooch. These were not just practical tools, but visible signs of her control over home wealth, food stores, and valuable trade goods. Bigger, more detailed key sets meant more duty and higher status. When a Viking woman walked through her settlement, the soft jingle of her keys announced her authority before she even entered a room. Legal protection for Norse women was equally impressive. Marriage contracts set property rights, and women kept ownership of their dowries. If a husband mistreated his wife, left her without cause, or failed his duties, she could start divorce at the thing or meeting. After a good divorce, she could take back her property and dowry, a level of money independence nearly unknown elsewhere in medieval Europe. The sagas, those great stores of Norse history and myth, give many examples of strong female figures. Warrior women like Logotha and Freyr, as Eriks.tir appear often, as do politically smart queens and influential Volvas. The latter, known as Eresses, held such respect that even kings wanted their prophecy wisdom. Find support these written pictures with female graves holding not only jewelry and home items but sometimes weapons, rune staffs, and other signs of spiritual or war authority. Women's influence reached into spiritual areas too. Female practitioners led private home rituals ensuring fertility, good harvests, and family safety. Some became known as healers using plant knowledge passed through generation. The Volva traveled between settlements doing complex magic rites involving trances, prophecy, and talk with other worlds. Their ritual staffs, special clothes, and ceremony knowledge gave them status as crossing normal social lines. Female artisans also left their mark on Norse culture. The archaeological record shows women working as skilled crafters making textiles, jewelry, and decorative items. Some mastered dream writing, becoming skald kaon or female poets who kept family histories and made memorial verses. Their textile work, especially making sails for longships, was crucial for Norse expansion and trade. Without these finely woven sails, the Viking Age might never have happened at all. Though less common than male fighters, proof suggests some women did join combat. Recent new looks at grave sites across Scandinavia have found several female burials with weapons and warrior gear. While some scholars say these might show symbolic, not practical links, others point to historical accounts of shield maidens and growing archaeological proof that at least some women took up arms. The Burka warrior was not necessarily typical, but she was part of a tradition with deep historical roots. Beyond the battlefield, where female warriors carved their legacy lies a volcanic island that saw perhaps the Vikings' most revolutionary era. In Iceland, Norse settlers did not just raid or trade. They built a society without kings where law replaced lordship and free men met to decide together. This remote Atlantic outpost became the place of history's boldest Viking experiment, making a whole new civilization from nothing. Around 870 CE, Norwegian ships began appearing on Iceland's harsh shores. Unlike other Viking expansions, this move was not mainly about loot or conquest. It was an exit of free-minded families seeking escape from growing central power under Norway's first king, Harald Fairhaven. These settlers, sometimes called king's foes, wanted a and where no single ruler could claim rule over them. They found just that in Iceland is isolated, wild empty land. When the Norse arrived, the island was basically unpeopled. The only earlier dwellers had been a small group of Irish monks called Papa, or in Norse tales, who had set up hermit adjust seeking solitude, but left as pagan Norsemen came. This empty space made something special in medieval history, a chance to set up a society with no existing power structures, no set aristocracy, and no past or feudal duties. The settlement time, or land nan, changed Iceland first. The first pioneers like Ingolfar and Narsen claimed huge areas, then split them among followers and later rivals. By 930 CE, most farmland had been taken, leading to tensions between competing families and need for a formal government system. The answer was revolutionary, setting up of the Ailing Eye, a yearly meeting where free men gathered at Ingivi Ella, or assembly plains, to settle disputes, make laws, and pick lost peakers remembered in, said the law code. The meeting happened in a striking natural setting, a rift valley where European and North American tectonic plates visibly pull apart. Here Iceland is made what historians call the world's first working parliamentary democracy. The Ailingi was not just a ruling body. It showed a radical rejection of kingly power for community-based choice. While much of Europe stayed in stiff feudal ranks, Iceland made a society ruled by agreement among free farmers. Iceland's harsh life shaped this unique culture. Settlers faced bitter cold winters, short growing seasons, and volcanic land with limited farmland. The island's isolation meant once ships froze in winter, communities had to be fully self-sufficient for months. These challenges built amazing resourcefulness. Icelanders developed skills in textile, saved foods, and new building methods using turf and stone to insulate against the cold. What really set Iceland apart was its amazing writing achievement. Despite, or perhaps because of their isolation, Icelanders became medieval Europe's most productive writers and historians. They wrote not just their own settlement tales, but saved the wider cultural memory of the Norse world. The Great Iceland sagas, written mostly in the 1100 seconds and 1200 seconds, captured the complex lord dispute, family feuds, and heroic trips of earlier generations with sharp psychological insight and story skill. Perhaps most remarkably, Iceland made its special lot rendition of blood feud settlement that stressed payment over revenge. While fights could turn bloody, the loss system aimed to restore social peace through carefully counted payments, not rising cycles of violence. This practical approach to justice showed a society where depending on each other was needed for survival. The practical justice of Iceland could not hold all its fiery people, especially one red-bearded outlaw whose violent temper would finally show and more hostile than anyone imagined. Eric the Red's exile would lead to the strangest Norse colony of all, a place called Greenland that was anything but green. Eric, or Orville the SS, unearned his nickname the Red from his fiery hair and equally fiery temper. After killing several men in Norway, he fled to Iceland only to keep his violent ways. When Icelandic leaders finally exiled him for 3 years around 980 CE, Eric sailed west into uncharted waters rather than face death. His needed journey became one of the most important voyages in Viking history. The land Eric found showed a sharp contrast. While its southern coastal fjords offered narrow strips of livable land with summer grazing chance, most of the territory was under a huge ice sheet. When his exile ended, Eric returned to Iceland with stories of this Greenland, an early case of Viking marketing genius. His strategic naming worked very well, drawing enough settlers to fill 25 ships for the return trip in 985 CE, though only 14 reportedly survived the dangerous crossing. These pioneers set up to main colonies, separated by hundreds of miles of rough land. The eastern settlement near modern QAQ, or Taku, became the bigger community, with finally over 4,000 people, while the smaller western settlement near today's Nuuk held about 1,000 settlers. A third smaller middle settlement rose between them. Despite the harsh setting, finds show these communities lasted nearly 500 years. Daily life in Norse Greenland needed amazing adaptation. The settlers built longhouses partly sunk in ground for insulation with thick walls of stone and turf. They raised mostly cattle, sheep, and goats, though keeping animals alive through Greenland's brutal winters needed huge fodder stores cut during the short summer months. Hunting added crucially to their diet. Seal meat gave key protein and fat, while walrus and narwhal ivory became their most valuable export. The Greenlanders' will to keep their Norse identity in this foreign landscape is striking. They built over a dozen stone churches, including the impressive cathedral at Garra with its 12-foot thick walls. They brought European goods at great cost: pieces of church bells, stained glass, bronze pots, and fine textiles have been found by archaeologists. This insistence on European cultural marks shows both pride and maybe psychological need. Their identity as Europeans, not Arctic people, mattered deeply to them. Around 1200 CE, the Thule people, ancestors of modern Inuit, moved into Greenland from northern Canada. These Arctic specialists had tech perfectly adapted to hunting sea animals through ice, tools the Norse never fully took, despite their presence just miles away. Proof of contact between the two groups stays sparse and unclear. A Norse ivory carving shows a figure in clearly Inuit-style clothes, and rare Thule items have been found at Norse sites, but no clear pattern of lasting contact appears. The fall of the Norse Greenland colonies stays one of history's most haunting mysteries. By the early 1400s, both settlements had vanished. Many factors likely added to their end. The Little Ice Age brought colder temperatures, shortening growing seasons, and increasing sea ice that hurt sea connections. The Black Death devastated Norway, cutting interest in keeping trade with their far colony. Without regular European contact, the vital walrus ivory trade collapsed as African elephant ivory became more available in European markets. Perhaps most critically, the Greenlanders held fast to the European farming identity despite growing environmental challenges. Unlike the Inuit, who thrived through their specialized focus on hunting sea mammals, Norse settlers kept investing scarce resources into livestock and crops, even as conditions worsened. The European cultural identity, first a source of pride and meaning, may have finally blocked the adaptations needed for long survival. As the Greenland colony fought the spreading ice, one man sailed west past the edge of the known world. What Leif Erikson found that would stay hidden from European knowledge for 5 centuries despite being possibly the most important geography find in human history. Around the year 1000 CE, an Australian named Barney Herjo LF's son was blown off course sailing to Greenland. Though he never landed, he reported seeing unknown coastlines west. These tempting tales reached Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, who bought Barney's ship and gathered a crew of 35 men to check these mysterious lands. Unlike his father, who named Greenland misleadingly to Dros Atlas, Leif would name what he found by their most striking traits. Sailing west from Greenland, Leif's trip first met a barren rocky landscape covered by glaciers. He named it Hell Island or Stone Slab Land, likely today's Baffin Island. Going south, they reached a flat, wooded coast which Leif called Markland, or Forest Land, probably modern Labrador. The trip pushed further south until they found a green land with wild grapes, salmon-filled rivers, and self-sown wheat fields, a sharp contrast to the frozen settlements they left behind. This rich region Leif named Vinland or Wineland at a spot now known as El and So Meadows on Newfoundland's northern tip. Digs in the 1960s found sure proof of Norse presence. The settlement had 8 buildings, longhouses built in the clear Norse style with turf walls on timber frame. Items found included a bronze cloak pin, a stone oil lamp, and a spindle whirl for spinning wool, all clearly Norse in design. Carbon dating confirmed living around 1000 CE, matching the timeline in the sagas. The settlement was small but important, housing about 70 to 90 people and working mainly as a winter base and repair station for more exploration. Unlike Greenland's lasting colonies, Alanso Meadows seems lived in only a few years. From this base camp, smaller trips went further south, maybe reaching areas as far as the Gulf of St. Lawrence or even New England. What makes this achievement remarkable is the Norse sailed the dangerous North Atlantic using simple tools, star watching, knowledge of common winds, and close familiarity with seaward and sea life patterns. They did what European sailors would struggle to copy centuries later, even with better navigation tools. Yet despite their amazing seamanship, the Vinland settlement proved short-lived. Norse meetings with native peoples, they called Deske, or Linge, finally shaped Vinland's fate. First meetings were peaceful, even including trade, but relations soured into violence. The saga tales describe the Norse being overwhelmed by greater numbers despite weapon advantage. Thorvald Eriksson, Leif's brother, was reportedly killed by an arrow in one such clash. Leif himself never returned to Vinland after his first voyage. Lead of later trips fell to his siblings and other important Greenlanders. The most ambitious dry permanent settlement came from Orfinn or Kar Lessie Fni, who led a group of 160 settlers, including women and livestock. After 3 years of struggle against hard winters and worsening relations with native peoples, they left the colony and returned to Greenland. The Vinland story was saved into main sources: the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red, written centuries after the events they tell. While they differ in details and give discoveries to different people, both confirm Norse presence in North America 5 centuries before Columbus. The archaeological proof at El and So Meadows changed these tales from mere legends to confirmed history. The Vinland sagas that saved Norse exploration of North America are just the top of the writing iceberg, a huge collection of stories that served as the shared memory of a whole culture. How did a largely pre-literate society manage to save such detailed histories across generations? The answer lies in the remarkable memory tradition of medieval Iceland, where spoken storytelling reached its peak as both entertainment and cultural saving. Unlike the grand myth epics of many ancient cultures, the Icelandic sagas present themselves with almost reporter-like calm. Their tellers rarely give opinions, instead letting events unfold through action and talk, making an illusion of objectivity that hides their art. This matter-of-fact style, describing even the most violent blood feuds or supernatural meetings with the same measured tone as a farming argument, give the sagas their special voice and lasting power. Behind this writing tradition stood the Skaldes, professional poets whose complex verse forms served as memory devices. Their strict meters with set patterns of alliteration and internal rhyme made their works very resistant to change over time. The Skaldes' reputation rested on both creativity and accuracy, the ability to praise a patron king's wins while faithfully keeping historical details. These were not just entertainers, but living archives whose memories saved centuries of Norse history through generation. Among the most celebrated works is Njals Saga, a masterpiece of psychological complexity, telling a destructive feud between families. Its hero, the wise Nj Olujai or Esison, shows an Norse hero could be defined by wisdom, not war skill, while its female characters show remarkable agency when Berg or Ironhold or S mutual hate grows into violence. The saga shows them not as extras to male conflict, but as main actors driving the story forward. Equally gripping as Egil's saga, showing a complex warrior poet whose contradictions embody the Viking spirit. Egil Skell, a grim Esesson, Berserker, rune master and maker of some of the finest skald, I see verse once saved his own life by making a praise poem overnight for King Eric of Bloodaxe, who had sworn to kill him. The saga smoothly blends historical events with personal drama, showing how individual nature shapes fate in the Norse worldview. The Laxdla saga gives one of literature's great love triangles where the beautiful guru Ennis chooses one man while loving another. Her famous line after her beloved's death, "To him I was worst whom I loved best," catches the tragic sense that runs through the saga tradition, where fate often blocks human desires despite all care. These tales are not just hero stories, but complete social histories saving daily life. They record farming methods, law processes, home arrangements, and trade networks with sharp attention to detail. We learn how rooms were set in longhouses, how arguments over grazing rights were settled, and how marriages were arranged between families. This fine detail makes the sagas precious historical documents, not just literary works. Perhaps most remarkably, archaeology keeps validating saga accounts with surprising frequency. The farm sizes described in Gret is saga matched dug remains. Trade routes named in Egil's saga fit item spread patterns. Even the climate shifts written in the Greenland sagas are confirmed by ice core samples. While supernatural parts in dialogue must be taken critically, the saga's geography and material culture descriptions have repeatedly proven reliable. The saving of these texts shows cultural persistence against huge odds. When the Codex Regius manuscript holding much of the poetic ed disappeared in the 1600s, Norse mythology nearly vanished from human knowledge. Its rediscovery decades later saved these ancient poems from being lost. Other manuscripts survived fires, volcanic eruptions, and political chaos through the dedication of collectors like Arne Magnusson, who saved priceless vellum pages from farmers using them as clothing patterns or window covers. Those saved vellum pages hold the blueprint to a universe unlike any other religious system in Europe, one where Thor's hammer still echoes in our Thursday, where Odin's wisdom lingers in our Wednesday. These were not just entertaining tales, but windows into a whole world view that shaped how the Norse understood their place in the cosmos. At the center of this cosmology stood Yggdrasil, a huge asteroid linking 9 separate worlds. Its 3 great routes reached to different realms, one to Asgard, the fortress home of the gods, another to Jotunheimr, land of the giants, and a third to Niflheim, the first realm of Iceland, Mist. Humans lived in Midgard, the middle realm, guarded from the surrounding chaos by a fence made from the eyelashes of the first giant Ymir, whose cut-up body formed the physical universe itself. Unlike the clear ranks of Greek or Roman gods, Norse deities belong to 2 distinct families, the warlike Sur and the fertility-focused Vanir. Their first fight ended in a truce shown by hostage swaps that brought figures like Enje or Freyr and Freyja from the Vanir into Asgard. This myth merger made a pantheon where war and fertility, conquest and growth existed in needed tension. Though in the All-Father showed this complexity, he gave his eye at Mimi, or as well for wisdom, and hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 nights to gain knowledge of the rune. His constant search for knowledge came not from intellectual curiosity, but desperate need. He sought any edge against the inevitable doom of Ragnarok. This end battle would take not only Owen, but also his son, or who despite his mighty hammer Mjolnir, would fall to the poison of the Mig-Ars or Mister. Norse worship reflected this practical relationship between humans and gods. Finds from sites like Pacro in Sweden show sacred spaces were usually simple, often groves, lake shores or clearings marked by wooden posts. The famous temple at Uppsala described by Adam of Bremen seems exceptional, not typical. He wrote, "In this temple, fully covered with gold, the people worship statues of 3 gods, or is said to rule the air, governing thunder and lightning, winds and rain, good weather and crops." Worships entered on community rituals called blot, where offerings ranged from food and drink to precious metals and animals. The autumn blot made sure of winter survival, while spring ceremonies secured fertile field. Bigger sacrifices marked crises or key events. As Ibn Fadl and famously recorded among the Rus, he wrote, "They gathered and built a large structure. They approached the wooden post that had a face like a human's and bowed before it." The Norse relationship with their gods was remarkably practical. They expected divine help in return for sacrifices with little stress on moral perfection or eternal salvation. When Christianity brought ideas of sin and redemption, it meant not just a new god, but a whole different framework for understanding one's place in the universe. The Norse afterlife reflected this practicality. Warriors dying bravely might be chosen by Odin's Volk, while Jur for Valhalla, where they would feast and fight until Ragnarok. Others might join Freyja in Folk Vangiar, stay with Hel in Herc Old Realm, or remain near burial mounds as Dr. Auguste, or undead guardians. This variety of afterlife options contrasted sharply with Christianity's heaven or hell choice. Perhaps most remarkable was how Norse religion existed without central authority or holy texts. Their cosmology passed entirely through spoken tradition, artistic pictures and ritual practice. The complex poetic structures of Eddic verse served as memory devices, saving myths across generations with surprising consistency. While Norse myths were saved through poetry, their beliefs about death were written in earth and ash. Under the great burial mounds of Scandinavia, lies proof of a people who put more resources into their trip to the afterlife than almost any other ancient culture, and for whom the line between living and dead stays surprisingly open. For Vikings, death meant a journey needing careful preparation. Digs across Scandinavia show burial practices varied by region, status, and time, but all shared a common purpose: equipping the dead for transfer to another realm. The body might be burned or buried depending on local tradition and belief. In coastal areas, ship burials became the mark of Viking funeral customs, where vessels once carrying warriors across seas would carry their souls to forever. The grandest of these ship burials tells us much about Viking cosmology. At Sutton, who in England, a 90-foot ship became the final rest of what was likely a 7th century Anglo-Saxon king with strong Scandinavian ties. The untouched chamber amidships held wealth of treasures, including a ceremonial helmet, shield, and sword, items a ruler would need in the afterlife. Similar grand ships have been found at Geocased Adentun in Norway, confirming this was not a lone practice, but part of a wide belief system. Burial ritual differed greatly between social classes, where chiefs might command big ceremonies lasting days or weeks. Common farmers got simpler treatment, though still with care for proper ritual. Archaeologists see patterns in grave direction, with many bodies placed along north-south lines, maybe lining up with cosmic forces. The placing of hands, sometimes peacefully at sides, other times holding weapons, suggests beliefs about how one should meet whatever waited beyond. The amazing preservation of the Osberga burial gives our clearest window into elite Viking funeral practices, found in 1904 near the Oslo Fjord. This 9th century ship burial held remains of 2 women surrounded by a stunning collection of artifacts. The finely carved wooden sled with interwoven animal designs, 15 horses sacrificed as companions, and for richly decorated bed posts suggest these were not ordinary people, but women of great social and spiritual importance. One may have been a queen, the other perhaps her attendant or a priestess. Their burial meant weeks of community effort and huge material cost. Preparation for the afterlife needed more than possessions. It demanded ritual knowledge. Expert practitioners prepared the body by specific steps, maybe washing it with special herbs or anointing it with oils before dressing it in formal clothes. Ibn Fadl, an Arab diplomat who saw a Rus-Swedish Viking funeral on the Volga River in 920 to see, described a slave girl willingly joining her master in death through a complex ceremony including ritual drinking, sex with male attendants, and finally strangling before her body was placed beside her master on the ship. The Norse afterlife reflected their complex vision of the cosmos, while we focus on Valhalla with its endless feasting and fighting. This place was for specific warriors chosen by Odin. The goddess Freyja took half those killed in battle for her whole folk than Gr. Though what happened, this stays largely unknown. Most ordinary Norse likely expected to join ancestors in Hel's realm, a shadowy place neither especially punishing nor rewarding, just the natural continuation of family lines. Fear of wrong burial made its own folklore. Tales of Dugdriv Augustear, physical undead who could touch the living, spread across the Norse world. Unlike ghosts, these reanimated bodies had superhuman strength and evil purpose. The Icelandica Bíjasoga tells of Ol Efra whose wrongly handled body rose to terrorize the area until locals dug up his body, cut off the head, and reburied it far from people. Such accounts reinforced the critical importance of proper burial steps. As Viking longships went beyond Scandinavian shores, they met more than new lands. They met Christianity, a sophisticated faith backed by strong kingdoms and a wide church system. Unlike their polytheistic worldview, where gods were seen as unpredictable forces to please, Christianity presented one all-powerful deity with a promise of salvation. This crash of spiritual systems would reshape Norse identity over centuries. First meetings were hardly peaceful religious talks. When Vikings hit monasteries like Lindisfarne, they were not just attacking wealth symbols, but unknowingly striking the heart of medieval European culture. These monastic centers saved knowledge, kept political ties, and showed divine protection. Each raid accidentally exposed Norse warriors to Christian ideas, architecture, and ritual objects that went back to Scandinavia as loot. As political realities shifted, many Norse leaders saw religious conversion offered real advantages. King Harald Bluetooth turned to Christianity around 965 CE. He marked a key moment in this change. His famous gelling stones is solid proof of this calculated choice, bearing both traditional Norse pictures and Christian symbols. The writing proudly says Harald made the Danes Christian, suggesting this was as much political unity as religious conversion. The shift was complex across Scandinavia. In Norway, King Olafur Tryggvason used brutal methods to impose Christianity, destroying temples and killing those refusing baptism. His successor, Olafur Haraldsson, later Saint Olaf, kept these forceful ways until his death in 1030, after which he became a martyr and symbol of Norwegian Christian identity. A remarkable change for a king once known for violence. Conversion stories show practical concerns often beat theological belief. The Icelandic chieftain Helgi, the Lean showed this practical approach, reportedly praying to Christ for sea trips, but calling on or for warring strength matters. This spiritual hedging let many Norse people navigate the unsure transition without fully leaving ancestral belief. Finds from grave sites tell a fascinating story of religious mixing. Graves from the 900 seconds and 1000 seconds often have both Christian crosses and pagan charm, suggesting families wanted to ensure dead relatives got proper passage whichever afterlife waited. At Borg in Lofoten, Dig showed a chief's hall holding both Christian items and spaces, clearly for traditional rituals, showing coexistence, not immediate replacement. Sweden's conversion process was especially gradual, with King Olafur Skotkonung taking baptism around 1008, yet ruling a mainly pagan people. The famous temple at Uppsala kept working well into the 1000 seconds, showing how deep traditional practices stayed, even as royal houses officially backed Christianity. Adam of Bremen's account describes sacrifices continuing at Uppsala decades after the king's conversion, highlighting the gap between official policy and popular practice. The story of Iceland's conversion offers perhaps the most dramatic example of practical religious shift. Facing possible civil war between Christian and pagan sides in 1000 CE, the law speaker, or Gergilos Foundation himself, a pagan, thought under a fur cloak for a day before coming out with a remarkable compromise. Christianity would become the official religion, but private pagan worship would stay allowed. This legal answer avoided bloodshed and made a uniquely Icelandic path to religious change. The writing legacy of this transition time appears throughout Norse sagas where characters handle conflicting spiritual loyalties. In N.J. Saga, the character of Hall or of Shot aches baptism, but gets permission for the olden children to keep making offerings to the old gods, while in the saga of the people of Eyri, the ghost of a dead pagan must be moved when a church is built, a story that shows the awkward displacement of old belief. These religious compromises mark just one side of a Norse world in change, where we often picture Viking culture ending in battle glory. The truth shows a more complex fate. The scary raiders who had terrified European coasts for generations were disappearing, not through defeat and glorious battle, but through something far stronger, civilization itself. By the mid-1000s, Scandinavia was changing from a patchwork of competing chiefs into organized kingdoms with central power. Kings like King Otto the Great, who ruled an North Sea empire covering England, Denmark, and Norway, set royal monopolies on violence. The once independent Jarlsund warriors, who might have led raids abroad, became part of royal ranks as noble, administrators, and military leaders. Their loyalty now went to crowns, not clan ambitions, and their energy went into state building, not plundering for unshores. This political union matched deep economic changes, as Scandinavian societies joined European trade network. Traders found regular commerce made more lasting wealth than occasional raiding. The busy trade centers at Hidibai, Burka, and Kalpang grew into permanent market towns. Finds from these spots show an explosion in imported goods, showing how fully Norse economies had linked with wider European markets. Former raiders found more profit trading furs, timber, and walrus ivory for silver, wine and glass, goods carrying none of the risks of armed conflict. European defenses had also adapted to the Viking threat over generations. Coastal communities built watches, alarm systems, and fortified settlements made to counter Norse raiding tactics. The surprise factors so key to Viking success had faded. Anglo-Saxon England, under kings like Alfred the Great and his heirs, had organized effective regional defense networks. Frankish rulers built fortified bridges to stop longships sailing upriver. These improvements made raiding trips increasingly costly and dangerous with shrinking returns. The spiritual change of the North also weakened the psychological base of Viking expansion. Christianity brought not only new belief systems but new ethical frameworks that condemned raiding, plundering, and enslaving as sinful acts, not glorious achievements. The warrior ethos that had celebrated death and battle as a path to Valhalla slowly gave way to Christian ideas of salvation through peaceful conduct. Church institutions strengthened royal power while giving different paths to status through writing, study, and church office. Historians often point to the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 as the symbolic end of the Viking Age, when King Harald Hardrada of Norway fell during his invasion of England, shot through the throat with an arrow. He showed the last great Norse try to carve territory through traditional Viking methods. Just 3 weeks later, William of Normandy himself, descended from Viking settlers, would beat the English at Hastings using more modern military ways that would define the coming medieval era: armored horse, professional soldiers, and siege warfare. Yet the Viking legacy outlived the Viking Age. Their genetic mark stayed across northern Europe, with recent DNA studies showing wide Norse ancestry in regions of Britain, Ireland, Normandy, and beyond. Their settlements grew into thriving communities with Norse language parts taken into English and French. Their building methods and artistic motifs influenced European architecture and decorative arts for centuries. Some Norse warriors found new roles in distant lands. Most famously, the elite Fia, or Aegean Guard of the Byzantine Empire. This unit of axe-wielding Scandinavians served as the emperor's personal guard in Constantinople, keeping their distinct northern identity while working in the most advanced political system of medieval Europe. Far from homeland, these men showed the change of the Viking ethos. Their war skills now used not for raiding, but for protecting civilization's treasures. The Viking legacy is not just about conquest. It is a story of resilience and change. Their adaptability still inspires us today. If you like this trip through history, remember to like, subscribe, and join us for more.